now we have one of the bones with us, which is a long bone. Basically, it is a long bone. I want us to speak about the anatomy of this bone, or how this bone is made and what is made up in this bone. So, as we start off, we have the basics. We have the basics where we have a bone. We divide it into 3 parts, very essential parts. So which are these 3 parts? We have this part, this one here. We call it the epiphysis. We have this part here, we call it the metaphysis. And we have this shaft here, we call it the diaphysis. So with those 3 parts of a bone, at least we have a clue on now the 3 parts of this bone. We start off on this far end, which we are calling the metaphysis, the epiphysis. We have this part at the end. This is the part that attaches to on a joint. This is the part that is involved in a joint. So we have something we call articular cartilage. We'll talk about the components of this cartilage as we move on. Okay, so that is the articular cartilage. So on this epiphysis, we have a growth plate for the small children as they are growing. That's why they should not be subjected to a lot of weight, because this can lead to a destruction in the epiphyseal plate. But we have this line in adults. I know most of my audience are adults, so we have this line called the epiphyseal line. So the epiphyseal plate grows, and when it matures into an adult, we call it the epiphyseal line. It is always here, separating the epiphysis from the metaphysis. Okay, now we move down. We have the spongy bone, the cancellous bone, which is found at the metaphysis, where I've dotted, and also mostly at the epiphysis. Now we move down where we have the medullary cavity. Going down, we have the intramedullary cavity. So inside here, inside the shaft of the bone, where we have the diaphysis, or what we call the shaft of the bone, we have the intramedullary space. This is where the red bone marrow passes through, and we will see the components and the importance of the red bone marrow. That is where it passes through. So basically, the intramedullary space is another very important structure inside of this bone. On this edge, except from where the bone has a joint, except from this other place is covered with something we call the periosteum. Okay, at this end we have something we call the periosteum. So the periosteum is the outer covering of this bone, the outer covering of this bone. So inside the periosteum we have now the cortical bone, which is covered in a cortex. That is the hard bone. But for this periosteum, it is the outer covering or the outer protection of this bone. So periosteum is very important in the protection of a bone. Now inside this bone we have this the cortex. Just inside the periosteum we have the cortex, and that forms the cortical bone or the hard bone. Yes, so the cortical bone is the hard bone, and it is just inside the periosteum. Okay, so now that is a cortical bone. So basically, when we have this osteum, the periosteum hardens, or rather becomes lighter or hardens as we progress downwards on age. So as you grow upwards on age, the periosteum becomes lighter and lighter. So it is thicker when the age is on a lower part. So when there is an injury, and there is an injury on the periosteum, it can cause something we call the subperiosteal injury or a subperiosteal bruise, which can even affect the place where we have the articular cartilage and we have subperiosteal bruise, which is very difficult to treat. We call it a subperiosteal hematoma. Subperiosteal hematoma. This occurs when there is an injury, mostly on the periosteum. Okay, we have moved from that structure of a bone. So a bone has that structure. Now I want us to move now from the periosteum. We want to move now inside. We find the cortical bone, which is the main thing here. Now when you are told of a bone, we just think of the hard part of the bone, which is the cortical bone. Now when we have this cortical bone, we have this cortical bone. This is the hard bone. Now this is the one that ensures that you are able to bear weight. Yes, this is the one that ensures you are able to have a framework and to have a bulk of muscles. This is the part of the bone that maintains all that. It is very good and it is a very important structure in the bone. Now we have just said after you move from the periosteum, now you come to this part, which is what we call the cortical bone. We want to know now, inside the cortical bone, what is it made up of? So remember, here in the periosteum, it contains a lot of nerves and a lot of we have the nerves and we have the blood vessels. Also at the surface of this bone, we have something we call the progenitor cells. Progenitor cells. So these are mesenchymal cells that produce something we call the osteoblasts. Osteoblasts. So these are the bone remodeling cells. When you have an injury, these are the cells that are involved in the manufacture of a new bone or the remodeling of a bone. They are also involved in the production of this cartilage by producing something we call the chondrocytes. So with this, progenitor cells are very important. They are found at the surface of the bone. So make a note of this. Make sure you note this, that nerves and blood vessels are first found in the periosteum. Now when we move to this part where we call the cortical bone, this is the periosteum. It is very good to note. This is the periosteum. So you first encounter the periosteum before you come to this cortical bone. So a cortical bone, or basically the hard bone, it is composed of packed, or rather closely packed organelles, or what can we say, structures called the osteons. Okay, they are very closely packed. So these are osteons, and now these osteons are responsible for the cells that we have in the bone, which are called the osteophytes. Now I don't want us to go to that point first. So when we move from the periosteum, we have the osteons. Now we expanded this. Now this is an osteon on its own because it is one of a bigger structure. Now when we have this osteon, inside this osteon we have a canal called the Hervatian, or the central Hervatian canal. Okay, so we have this central Havesian canal, which is a very important structure to note. Around this central Havesian canal, we have concentric rings of matrix called the lamellae. Okay, so we have concentric rings called the lamellae, which are around the central Havesian canal. So note of the concentric wings of matrix. As I said earlier in my last video, the bone is made up of matrix of collagen. So lamellae is this concentric wings that are made of this collagen and are a matrix. Okay, between these lamellae, which are very closely packed and they are hard. When you hear of a matrix, you imagine of a mesh wire. They are interconnected. So for blood vessels to move and nutrients to move to this canal, which is the Havesian canal, there must have to be spaces. Okay, so there are spaces inside here called the lacunae. Okay, lacunae. So inside here there are spaces we call the lacunae. Okay, so the lacunae are the spaces in between the concentric wings of of matrix, which are called lamellae, and they are the spaces that hold or that carry our able cells called the osteophytes. Okay, so our osteophytes are held or are produced or are. So I say we have to note that the periosteum has the nerves and the blood vessels, and these are needed by these cells over here. So from the periosteum to the osteon, okay, from the periosteum to the cortical bone, there must be a channel as to which these nerves and these blood vessels will pass to the cortical bone, and we have our channel called the Volkmann's. The Volkmann's channel, okay, or the rather we can call it the Volkmann's canal. Okay, so we have the Volkmann's canal, which allows blood vessels to move from the periosteum into the cortical bone. Okay, now from the Volkmann's canal, we still need, now it have come to the osteos, but we have a matrix. Okay, we have matrix that we said it is networked, it is more of a mesh wire, and we need those blood vessels to pass through even to the cells and to the Havesian canal. So we have other few channels, a lot of channels that pass through these spaces called lacunae. They from the Havesian canal through these channels, so they give the nutrition to the cells. They pass through these lamellae until they come to this Volkmann's canal, and we call those channels canaliculi. So we call those channels canaliculi. So canaliculi interconnect nutrients from the Volkmann's canal to the osteophyte cells. Okay, so very important. When these canaliculi are altered, it means these osteophytes will not get the amount of blood, the amount of nutrients needed. Thus, will not have the required amount of calcium, the required amount of the phosphorus. So nutrients that are needed here, minerals, all types of nutrients, we need to get them from these channels. From these channels, obviously from the blood to this Volkmann's canal to this canaliculi. So if you think that the bones does not contain a lot of blood vessels, it contains blood vessels that pass that blood. That's why I drew this. This is a blood vessels that passes blood into the cortical bone. Now, we said we have the red bone marrow, the red bone marrow. So this cortical bone, inside it, around the metaphysis, as we say, and the epiphysis, we have this spongy bone or the cancellous bone. We have the cancellous bone, and between it, between this, we have the intramedullary canal. So inside of this, we have the red bone marrow. So as I said, bones can affect your metabolism to the greatest extent, because if the red bone marrow is produced inside of the bone, that is where your red blood cells, your platelets, your white blood cells, which are used for immunity, which are used to transport oxygen, which are used for clotting, they are found inside this bone, somewhere we call the red bone marrow. So inside this bone is a very important channel, what we call the intramedullary cavity, where it contains the red bone marrow. So that is a general overview of what is the anatomy of a bone. So I think we have learned something good. We have learned something deep involving a bone. So for more content, for more knowledge on this, as we deep to know our bones better, and as we gain knowledge on how our bones are made, make sure you subscribe, make sure you like, make sure you share, and make sure you are a part of this great community as we learn and as we promote the orthopedic community, so that we can take care of our bones well, and with that we will find ourselves taking care of our red bone marrow, which will in turn bring good red blood cells, bring good white blood cells, and bring good platelets, and that is our aim. Thank you so much. I love you guys. Make sure you watch this video to the end, and that is the greatest thing of this.